Welcome. Whether you're newer to the craft or you have been on the path for a long time, many witches are looking for ways to deepen their connection to deity. So if you feel pulled towards a particular deity, a certain pantheon, or you're not sure and you're looking for answers here, this episode is for you. Now, witches have quite a different relationship to deity than, say, those who worship the gods of the Abrahamic religions, where we view them as more of an ally in our magical workings rather than some kind of an all powerful source that either rewards or punishes us. So we will be talking about different types of theism tonight. We'll be talking about ways to choose a pantheon and also ways to choose a pantheon and a patron. And once you've chosen one, what to do next. So welcome, I'm Aislin, Merry Meet. This is Ask Aislin, and I am here tonight talking all about how to connect to deity. So if you are here with me live, feel free to put questions and comments in the chat. There is a Q&A at the end, and I'll be answering everyone's questions in addition to a few that people have sent me prior to this. If you like what you hear in the episode, leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere during it, and that will just help us get this into the feed of more people. And just a note, I had oral surgery 48 hours ago, and I can see on this video I don't look nearly as horrific as I look actually in person right now, but I'm having a little trouble talking, so just letting you know that is what is going on. So welcome. It's good to see everybody here. And I'm just going to jump right in. I'm going to start by talking about a few different types of theism, just to get us started, and then we will dive into pantheons and patrons and all of that good stuff. All right, so the first type of theism I want to talk about is monotheism, because it is a theism that is very prevalent in Western culture. So I looked this up prior to the episode, and 55% of the world's population, at least the part that was polled or that they assume is representative of the world's population, believe in a monotheistic God. So that means one God, believing in the existence of one and only one God. Now, what this means is it doesn't leave room for the gods of other religions and other cultures. It tends to be found within the Abrahamic religions, that is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And it is interesting because sometimes if you read some scholarly work, especially that is aimed more towards monotheism, it will posit monotheism as being a more sophisticated way of looking at deity. And I think that is just some BS, actually. To me, that sounds like the narrative of oppressive language, right? And in the conqueror mentality that our way is more sophisticated than the ways of those who believe in, let's say, polytheism, for example. So, and at the same time, it also really leaves no room for other cultures, other religions, and other points of view. So I will then talk about polytheism next. So polytheism does leave room for other views, other cultures, other religions. So this is a belief in the existence of many deities. Doesn't mean that the person who's polytheistic worships all of those deities, but they at least leave room for the belief and the idea that there are many. Now, polytheism can be hard or soft, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But examples of polytheism would be Hinduism, Wicca, neopaganism, any groups in neopaganism that believe in more than one deity at a time, Druidism, Shintoism, Candomblé religion of South America. So there's a lot of religions and cultures that believe in polytheism. Now, also, that what I just mentioned is not an all-inclusive list, and there are other groups that believe in polytheism. Now, dualism is an interesting idea. It's somewhere kind of in the middle. Dualism is this idea that there are two complementary but opposing forces, typically one that is good and one that is evil, and they have equality. So unlike in monotheism, where there's God, and perhaps in the Christian religion there's the devil is not on equal footing with God, so it is a a form underneath him, but in dualism, these two forces are equal. They have the equal power. Now, contemporary religions that work with dualism tend to be Zoroastrianism and Manichaeism. And then there's also animism. And here is where I will pause for a moment and say it is possible to believe in more than one of these theisms. So, for example, many people who are polytheistic also find themselves to be animistic. So, animism is where there's a belief that spirit resides not just in all living things and animate things, but also in all inanimate things as well. So you will find this among some witches, some forms of neopaganism. You'll find it in Hinduism, and Buddhism also contain this idea, as well as Shintoism especially. Shintoism is a belief in the spirits of all of the natural world and everything around them, even in the stones and the things that are inanimate. Now, there are other forms of theism, and this is not a lecture on theism, so I've decided to leave a few out, but I do want to mention agnosticism. This is a belief that divinity is not necessarily not there, but is unknowable by people. So a person who considers themselves agnostic does not believe nor disbelieve. It's neither one or the other. And then in atheism, there's a belief in no deities. So let's move forward with polytheism, since polytheism tends to be the theism that the majority of witches who do believe in deity and do work with deity tend to gravitate towards. Now, there's this idea of hard versus soft polytheism. So during hard polytheism, each deity is a real and distinct being with its own personality and its own history, its own stories. And in this form and in this belief system, deities are not considered archetypal or archetypes in any way. Deities are not considered just simply facets of all the same God. So in this case, Venus and Aphrodite would be considered exactly different. I shouldn't say exactly, but very, very different. Though they have some similarities, they are different and they are distinct goddesses. Now, soft polytheism, on the other hand, is this idea that the universe has a creative presence within it. There's a great spirit, or sometimes called the divine spirit. And the idea behind this is that this concept of divine spirit is too vast, it's too difficult for the human mind to comprehend. So what the divine does is it splits itself into facets that make themselves more accessible to the human mind. So in soft polytheism, gods and goddesses all come from the same place, though they still have distinctions among them. We're not saying that they're all the same thing, we're just saying they come from the same place. Certain gods in one pantheon then can manifest as different forms in another pantheon. So for example, Venus and Aphrodite under the umbrella of soft polytheism would be considered manifestations of the same energy, but manifesting in two different cultures in slightly different ways. And we can even extend that into Lakshmi. There are people who say that Lakshmi is a manifestation of that same energy as well, all the way over in India in the Hindu pantheon. We might even say that Isis is the queen of heaven. She is also a manifestation of that same kind of energy. So here they're perceived differently in different cultures and in different religions. Now, the thing that I think is important is that we can believe in both hard and soft polytheism at the same time, or we can actually find kind of a middle ground. I feel it myself, I believe more in that middle ground. So I feel that the gods and goddesses are separate beings with their own personalities, with their own interests and tastes and abilities to help us in different ways. But they are related, in my opinion, because they descend from the same place. So here in that way, we can work with the two forms of polytheism at the same time, both hard and soft. So just saying hi to those who are joining. If anybody has any questions or comments, you can leave them in the chat. The questions don't have to only be about deity. The Q&A is for anything related to witchcraft, shadow work, energy work, anything that's on your mind. So let's now talk about deity within the neopagan context, because the majority of people who follow me are interested in that and not other types usually. So, in a neo-pagan context, we have this idea of the Great Spirit. We might think of this as just the energy without it within the world. Some people will call this universal energy. Some people will call this, the Great Divine. Whatever that energy is that created this entire universe. Now, this energy divides itself into God and Goddess if we are looking at it from this perspective. And so at times we may refer to the goddess or the god as just simply being that energy descended down into those two forms, but not descended down into all of the separate gods and goddesses yet. So, what this means is that if you are someone who wants to work with deity, but you don't feel like you have a patron yet, or you're not sure who to choose, and that I will talk about in just a little bit, but it's always okay to just simply call on the goddess or call on the god, and you don't have to differentiate it into different deities in the different pantheons if you don't want to. Now, the great goddess, she can take on many different forms. She can take on the form of the maiden, the mother, and the crone, especially if you're someone who believes in the triple goddess. Here, those energies correlate to the waxing moon, the maiden energy, the full moon, the mother energy, and the waning moon, the crone energy. Now, the great god can also take on different forms. So, in one form, he becomes the horned god or the green man, who is the consort to the goddess. And in other forms, he can become the light god or the dark god, which is interesting because the light god and the dark god, whereas the goddess, when she splits herself into her energies of maiden, mother, and crone, she is ruling over the energies of the lunar cycle, right? The waxing to the full to the waning moon energy. When the god separates himself into the light god and the dark god, he rules over the energies of the solar year. So that light energy and the light god representing the half of the year that we are currently in, but almost about to end. So this is the energy that begins at winter solstice and ends at the summer solstice, as the energy of the solar cycle is waxing up to its pinnacle at summer solstice. Now the dark god then takes over on the other side. So once we get to summer solstice and we begin to enter into that waning half of the year that goes all the way past Samhain into the winter solstice, this is where the dark god rules that half of the year. Now, we'll be talking actually more about that in 2 weeks when I do an episode on Litha and summer solstice, because it's very interesting at that point of summer solstice, when we still have, in most cultures, we still have a lot of summer left to go. And I shouldn't say summer, most cultures, but in most geographical areas, we still have a lot of summer to go, but we are in the waning half of the year. So that's an aside, but I will talk about that more in 2 weeks when we talk about summer solstice and Litha. So getting back to our gods and goddesses, so the forms of the great god and the great goddess then can be personified down into all of the various gods and goddesses of all of the different pantheons. Now, it can be useful to group our gods and goddesses also into archetypal categories. So we can look at them in their pantheons, which we'll do in just a moment. We can also look at them within their archetypal categories. So when we look at it this way, divinity is like a beautiful diamond. This is a metaphor that Christopher Penczak uses often. And I think it's a great, great way to think of how we can view deity in a lot of different ways. So when we're looking at that beautiful diamond, that diamond is divinity. It is the energy, whatever you call that source that created everything, that is the diamond in its totality. But as we get closer in and we look at different parts of the diamond, we notice this facet and this face is a little bit different than that one, and this one shines in a slightly different way. And so these faces are the gods and the goddesses. And so sometimes when we're working with deity, we get very interested in one particular face or facet of that diamond. And this is when we choose a patron and we begin to work exclusively or a lot of the time with that deity. And then some people get really interested in a set of faces or facets. And this is when we get really interested in a certain pantheon, so Egyptian, for example, or Greek, and we want to work with all of the deities from that one pantheon. So what I love about witchcraft is just the ability for us to carve out our own paths. No one is saying there's a right or a wrong way to do any of it. this video, like all the videos I make, are offering suggestions and ways that you can work with deity, and you want to find the one that resonates the most with you. So let us talk about actually picking a patron next. But before we do, I do want to mention as well that it's also fine for you to switch back and forth between seeing the diamond and seeing the facets. So sometimes you want to just work with that universal energy of the creator, and sometimes you want to zone and really hone in and you want to work with a specific deity or a specific pantheon. So you're free too. You don't have to just choose one way. You're free to go back and forth between the different ways of working with deity. And as you travel down your path, you may find that some deities speak to you at certain times, depending on the part of the path that you're in. So for example, if you are on a healing part of your path, you may be drawn to the healing deities. If you are on a part of your path where you are searching for a soulmate or a partner, you may be drawn to the love deities or the deities of the moon, for example, or emotions. So you can travel down your path. You can pick different ones at different times. And I'm going to be telling a little bit of my own stories. You'll see how I chose and was chosen by certain deities depending on where I was in the path. I'm just going to pause for a second. Lori said she's been feeling drawn to the triple goddess, possibly due to her struggle to embrace her new crone season of life. Yeah, so you could definitely be pulled in and kind of drawn to that triple goddess aspect as a whole. You might start to explore some of the darker goddesses, the crone goddesses in their crone form. Hecate is a good one. She appears in different forms, but can appear in that crone form. Caradwyn. There are a lot of deities that you can work with in the crone form. So how do we choose a deity? So if we decide we want one, and just to normalize this too, you don't have to choose one either. You don't have to work with deity to be a witch. We had someone who asked that question last week, and absolutely, you do not have to work with deity. But if you want to work with one, how would we choose one in the first place? So one thing to do is to look at the pantheons. Are you drawn to a specific pantheon? So think back to some of the mythology that you learned as a child. Were you ever intrigued by any of the stories that you learned? Now, I will say that in the Western world, especially if you grew up like before the 2000s, so 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, a lot of the mythology that was taught in school was very westernized. So we were often taught mostly the Greek and the Roman myths with not a lot else. Now, since I became a teacher and I've been teaching since, early 2000s, a lot of my students bring their history work with them, or they sometimes are fortunate enough to be taking a world religions class and they'll bring their homework with them to our sessions. And I notice that there's an expansion of making sure that kids today are learning myths from other cultures, not just those more westernized ones. But so what I'm saying here is if you are, in your 40s, 50s, 60s, you may only have been exposed to a very small amount of myths. And if that were the case, you might go diving deeper into some of the other pantheons and just explore. But if there is a pantheon or a specific set of myths that you've always been interested in, I would definitely jump in. I would start my search there for a patron. So learn the names of the deities. Learn all of the deities in the pantheon that you can, as many as you can. Learn about their correspondences. Learn about their stories and their myths. Learn about their rivalries. Learn as much as you can from their stories. Immerse yourself also in the culture of that pantheon. I think it's really important, or the culture where that pantheon originated. So I think it's very important for us to be aware of the culture, to be aware of anything that's going on historically too, so we're as informed as we can be. You may be drawn to a pantheon that is similar to your culture. So for example, you might be drawn to the Celtic pantheon because you are Irish and English. Or you might be drawn to the Norse pantheon because your family comes from the areas of Scandinavia. So you might be drawn to those pantheons, or you might be drawn to ones that are not from the culture of your birth in this incarnation. Perhaps you're drawn to pantheons and patrons that you worked with in a previous incarnation. So I've always been drawn very deeply to the Hindu myths, but I was raised Christian. So I do believe that there was a lifetime that I spent in India, at least one. And I think that is one aspect of my affinity towards that pantheon. Now, when you work with a pantheon, you may work with all of the deities in that pantheon, or maybe just one or two. It's up to you. Again, it's your path to carve out. So just in case you're wondering about some pantheons you can look into, there are the obvious ones like Celtic and Egyptian, Greek, and Roman. You can look at Norse, Scandinavian. You can look at Mesopotamian. There's very interesting gods and goddesses there. Sumerian, Babylonian, Hindu, like I mentioned. The Orishas of West Africa, you can look at the Aztec and the Mayan myths, or look at the Chinese and Japanese myths as well. So there's a lot to choose from, and especially if you know anything about your past lives and you know that you came from other regions of the world during different lives, perhaps explore those pantheons as well. Let's look at a second way. So that's kind of the first method of choosing a patron is looking at the pantheons, looking at the myths and the different cultures that they come from. Now, a second method of choosing a pantheon or patron is to work with, I shouldn't say a pantheon here, this would be to choose a specific patron, would be to work with a specific archetype. So when you are working with an archetype, you're looking at deities that may come from many different cultures and pantheons, but they all have something in common. So for example, if you are really into shadow work, if you're really doing shadow work, like I know a lot of people who follow me and are in this group are, you might work with gods and goddesses of the underworld. And in fact, in our own membership, Shadow Seekers, we work with a lot of deities that could be classified in some way as being underworld gods and goddesses. Persephone, especially in her form once she's been abducted by Hades, Hel, Ereshkigal, Rhiannon, Caradwyn, Hades, Pluto, Osiris. So you might be working with deities that really allow you to go deep down into the unconscious. And really, what is the underworld? Well, the underworld is the place where our precious and beloved dead go to, but it's also the place where our gods and goddesses they transition into during that dark half of the year. So in a lot of ways, the underworld is our unconscious. So working with deities that travel there is a good way to work with the idea of shadow work. Now let's say instead you want to work with earth energy. Suppose you're trying to do a lot of grounding or a lot of healing. So here you might work with deities of the earth like Gaia or Isis or Tiamat, Modra and Danu. There's a lot to choose from there as well. Now when it comes to patrons, some will choose to honor a very specific patron. I just want to say you can have more than one patron as well. It's always about your path and the path that you're carving out for yourself. So some will choose to honor a specific patron, and that patron may make themselves known to you, or you may seek them out. I'm going to tell you my story where I have found them both different ways. So for example, something might just resonate with you or pop out to you. So I noticed in the chat, Lori was saying Hecate has come up in so many conversations in the last few months. And she says, looks like someone wants me to research. Yeah. So I think that is definitely a way. So this is like kind of the first way I'm talking about is when it's popping up in conversations, you have this urge to read myths about this character, about this goddess. Perhaps you are, watching things on TV and it keeps coming up. Definitely, I think this is that god or goddess tapping you on the shoulder and saying there's something that you might want to explore here for sure. So in that case, in some ways, they're seeking you out, right? They're saying, hey, I'd like to speak with you. And then in other ways, you're seeking them out. So you absolutely can become interested in Venus, for example, because you just really like that goddess and it didn't necessarily feel like there was any tapping on the shoulder, but you're interested in pursuing her. Absolutely. In the other cases, you may get that tap on the shoulder and you begin to explore that deity as well. It may lead you to another deity or to that specific pantheon. You never know. So I always say just be as open as possible on the path so you don't miss anything, right? We don't want to be so blinded by our own preconceived notions of what's supposed to happen that we miss some of the messages along the way. Now your patron may reach out to you like with Lori, like hearing conversations around you where it's coming up all the time. You may hear something in a meditation or sense something or see something. You may hear, sense, or see something within a dream or have synchronous experiences out in the world. The deity may have something to teach you or show you right now, and that's why they're reaching out to you, and it may be part of your soul's purpose, and that may change at a later time. So when you choose a patron, you can think of yourself as a priest or a priestess of that deity, right? And that you're kind of serving them within this world, or at least I don't even like the word serve because it feels like really Christian to me. But you're working with them. You are being a voice for them outside in the external world. Now, not everyone finds a patron right away, so I always think it's really important to normalize this because sometimes people will find me or my coven or be working with me for a while and will kind of start to panic because they feel like everybody else has got a patron and they don't, and that's totally okay. You can be on the path for a long time and not really have any speak to you, in which case you can kind of reach out, explore the myths you like, or just work with the great goddess or the great god. And you also may pick one now and then choose a different one later. So like I said, just be open. So let me just tell you a bit of my story here, and then I'm going to talk about some ways that once you've picked a patron, what you can do next. So when I first came to the craft, I started in my late teens and very early 20s. This was kind of the beginning of me transitioning, and there's some back and forth of me going back to Christianity and then coming to witchcraft and then back and forth. And eventually in 1997, I set foot on the path for the first time. I said, this is absolutely the one I'm on. And I dedicated myself to the goddess. So at that point, I didn't chosen a patron or anything. I dedicated myself to the goddess on Litha morning 1997. Now, shortly after that, as I started to research and begin working with deity, in that part of my world, when I was in my very early 20s, I was searching for a soulmate, for love partners, things like that. And so I became really interested in Venus. I loved her, and Aphrodite. So I kind of worked with both the Greek form Aphrodite and Venus of the Roman pantheon. I really loved her for a lot of things. I loved her because not only was she a good goddess to work with in my own love spells that I did, but she's also really good for instilling self-love in a person. And if you're trying to find a partner, having self-love is key in the beginning. And I also love the aspects of her that made me feel really beautiful. Like back then I was in a band, always on stage, always having my picture taken and videos and things like that. And so I really loved working with her because I felt that, she just instilled me with my own internal self-beauty. So as I went through, my path and I got a little bit older, I was at the Cor Lucius Temple one night, and we were doing a class on meditation. I was kind of deep in meditation, and I heard in my ear the name Epona was whispered. And so I did not know the name at the time, and I looked it up and found her to be a goddess, basically a Celtic goddess, who was one of the few goddesses that the Romans actually brought in her full form into Rome and worshipped her under that same name and didn't change her into like a Roman goddess. And so I began working with her, and I didn't really know what path, why she wanted me. It was a tapping on the shoulder. And I was like, okay, you got to listen to this. And it doesn't mean I stopped working with Aphrodite. I still worked with her as well. And then I would work with Epona in different ways. Now, Epona really helped me with my, some of my deeper work. some of that kind of work. She is considered an underworld goddess in some. She is a one who kind of heralds people through transitions of life. She's also a fertility goddess. And at that time, I was not on my fertility journey, but would be later. So it's kind of interesting that she caught me there in my late 20s, and I began working with her then. So so what I want to say is too is that at that point when Epona had actually talked to me, that was in I would say like 2005. So I'd been on the path for like 8 years at that time. So I tell this story just to normalize the idea that if you don't feel like someone's speaking to you, don't panic. Like this is not a race to the finish line or something. I worked with Venus and Aphrodite for years. That was just the one that I chose. So absolutely don't panic if you feel like no one's talking to you yet. Just start doing research. Just be open to the process. And like I said, you could always call on the great goddess and great god at rituals if you haven't found one yet. So here's an interesting question: do the gods need us? And if so, why do they come to us? If not, why do they come to us? So I don't really believe that the gods need us to survive. Though if you have read or seen the show American Gods, which is fantastic by the way, if you haven't checked it out, I'd highly recommend it. There is the idea within that the gods need us to survive. People have to be thinking about them in order for them to have power and strength, which is what the whole book is about. But it's fiction, but still an interesting idea, right? But I don't necessarily believe that they don't need us to survive, but we we can more effectively make changes in our own life, and they can too when we work with them. And not only that, but they can more effectively change the consciousness of the world when we work with them as well. So to me, I think they need us and we need them. It's sort of like a union together. And it definitely isn't this idea of that Abrahamic God that's so high above us and we are so unworthy and so small and all of these things. I've never felt that to be the relationship that I have had with deity once I became a witch. It's in a lot of ways like even working with one of my other patrons, Lakshmi, there is this tag that you can put on the name of a Hindu deity at the very end. It's Yei. It's Yei. Most of the time it's spelled. And it basically means dear one, dear friend. So when we actually say Lakshmi Yei, it's like saying my dearest friend Lakshmi. So I've found such a loving relationship with the deities in a way that I didn't in my when I was a Christian, mainly because of that closeness that I feel there is, and that not this idea that we're so far below them and unworthy of them, and they're only here because in relationship with us because they need something or just to show us how powerful they are or something. I've never really felt that to be the energy. So once we partner with the gods and goddesses, what do we do next? So you can, through ritual, you can start to work with them that way. So simple rituals to honor your patron deity are always a neat idea. You can sing and chant during these rituals. You can just simply talk to them and tell them about your day or what you're working on or what you hope to come out of the relationship with them. Lighting candles. I like to set up an altar for deities, and you can get statuary. So this is a statue. Let me show it here that my best friend gave me. This is Kuan Yin, and I actually have not worked with Kuan Yin yet, but my friend gave this to me when I started my fertility journey. And I've always felt that Kuan Yin is the patron of the baby. But I think she wants to work with me too, because I was recently, I went to the psychic fair a couple weeks ago, and the very, very first being that came through was Kuan Yin. And I didn't tell this lady that I've got a Kuan Yin statue on my altar or things like that. So, so I think Kuan Yin wants to work with me. So I have this feeling once I become a mother, she'll move in and kind of become my patron then. But there's other statuary you can get. I went to a antique store and found this bronze horse and put this on my Epona altar. So there's a lot of things you can, kind of different statuary you can get. It doesn't necessarily have to be a statue of the god or goddess. So there's little ones like this. This is my little Ganesha that I put on the baby's altar, but I also have a bigger Ganesha back here on, this is my main altar. So a lot of things you can do, or getting card decks. So this one is only goddesses. This is the divine feminine deck. I love these decks too because you can go through them. It gives you ideas of different deities to work with. And sometimes I will pull out cards. This is the Goddess Oracle deck, which I got, this one of my first decks I ever got. And these cards are really neat because you can pull them out. Here's Hathor. And you can pull them out, and you, like, let's say I was doing a ritual with Hathor and we could place this on the altar if I didn't have statuary for her. So just different things you can do to kind of honor the presence of these gods and goddesses within your life. You can also do deep meditation, and during deep meditation, very similar to prayer, talking to the god or the goddess, asking them what they want you to know, how they want to work with you, and then just listen and trust your intuition that what you hear back or what you sense back is coming from them. Prayer is not just for Abrahamic religions. Many witches pray to the gods and goddesses, and the patrons they've chosen. You can also very much work with deities by embodying them. So if there is something that you want to draw in, trying to embody the goddess or god and that quality can be very useful. So for me, working with Lakshmi and working with the mother energy of her as I'm trying to become a mother myself, and just imagining what is it like to stand there and be Lakshmi. How could I bring more aspects of her into my own life? That's a great way to work with deity. Leaving offerings for them. Listen to what they want. They will often tell you, bring me this. I've told the story about the fairies outside telling me they wanted sand from the beach. It's very strange. We live 25 miles from the beach, but that's what they wanted. And the gods and the goddesses will also tell you things like that. But if you're not sure, go ahead and do some research. You'll find a lot of information on different things that you can offer them. And also, some deities have very specific desires. So, for example, Aphrodite, she doesn't really like dead flowers. So if you leave her flowers, make sure that you take the flowers off the altar, because she's the goddess of beauty and she doesn't really like dead things. So, when you do your research, sometimes you will find those things about gods and goddesses. Kali really likes red flowers. So just things like that you'll find when you do some research. You can also connect to deities through familiarity, through working with them over and over and over again. So it's just kind of like any friend that you have when you first meet. Your friendship is new. You don't know each other as much, but as you get to know them better, you get closer and closer. And the same goes with the deities. So call them every month when you're starting to work with them. Don't mix it up all the time. Call the same one over and over. I always, at this point, this stage where I am right now, at full moon, I always call Ganesha and Lakshmi, and at dark moon, I always call Ganesha and Kali. So, and this is just a way that I'm constantly working with them through this and building the familiarity with them. Study their myths. We already talked about that, but get in and dive in and read about their myths, learn more about them. Set up an altar specifically for that deity if you have the space for it. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is that your path, again, is your own. So don't feel like from listening to all this that you have to find a patron right now. You don't. This talk is just about giving you ideas of how you can connect. So let me I'm going to dive into the chat right now, and I've got some questions that were sent to me for the Q&A. If you're here with me live, please feel free to put other questions in here. It does not have to be just about deity. It can be about anything related to witchcraft, shadow work, energy work, anything. So Lori had said that her daughter was cleaning out the junk drawer and found a small key that didn't go anything and handed it to me just last night. And yes, Agate very much is the key. She is the keeper of the keys. I can't remember, Lori, if you came to our Beltane ritual, but we honored Hecate as the keeper of the keys at that ritual. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and dive into a few questions that people sent me. And anybody who is here is live, if anything's on your mind, go ahead and put them in the chat and I will answer those too. I'll stay here as long as it takes to answer questions. So here is a great question from Jen, and she wants to know a good way to protect yourself from others is energy. And she says, I wear crystals. But is there something else that I could try? And then she goes on to say specifically, she's thinking about negative energy and comments that she might get at the events that she runs where she comes into a contact with a lot of people. So I definitely hear you and feel you there. Even though a lot of the events I do are online, you still pick up that energy from other people. And so it is wise. It is always wise for us to protect ourselves. So especially this is the case if we're particularly sensitive people, we're sensitive to other people's energies, and we're going to be in a large space where there's going to be a lot of people who are passing by or have their eyes on us. So one of the things that I would say is that you could practice some shielding techniques. And sometimes we think of like shielding when we're in a big area full of people, we think of this as like pulling our energy in. But in reality, it can be better to think of it as pushing your energy out. Make your aura bigger. And so see, when we pull in, they're sort of like they're infringing on our own space, right? The more we make ourselves small. But if instead we push it out, and then we have this boundary around us where we're not going to be as affected by the energy that's out there, that can be very, very helpful, especially in large settings like those psychic fairs that I go to. And I'm imagining you're at kind of events like marketplaces and things like that. There's a lot of people coming booth to booth. So definitely work on pushing your aura out. And you can just close your eyes and just kind of imagine like an egg just surrounding you, but don't make it really small. Make it nice. Make it like a nice arm's width out on either side of you. So that's one thought you can do. The other thought that I have done that I found to be very helpful, and this is something I did when I started my business and started this group, in fact, which at this point has been almost a year and a half ago, and is setting an intention to protect your business and your own person from negative energy and too much negativity. So just setting that intention, like I'm not going to be affected by it. It's not going to kind of come into my sphere, and that doesn't mean there's hecklers and things, and they come in and out, and they'll say mean things to get attention, or who knows what their intention is. But when you set that intention, at least I have found that I've been affected by it much less than I probably should be. In fact, people have told me they're surprised at how little negative feedback I get. And I think it's because or heckling, I guess I should really say. And it's because I kind of put that energy around my business to protect it. When you're going into large areas, especially in person, make sure that you are grounded before you go into that space. So just take a few moments in the car before you go in and just close your eyes, really set your roots down, get really nice and grounded, and you'll be less affected. The other thing that I do, and I'm not sure I've ever shown this on video, though I've said it in a few places, is I like to do the banishing pentagram, drawing the banishing pentagram, and I do like a little spell with it. And so what I do is if I feel that there is negative energy coming, or I feel like a little unsafe, so let's say I'm walking late at night or something, I will do this. And so you take your finger, you're going to start in the bottom left, and then you're just going to draw a star. So it's starting in the bottom left. Hold on. Let me do that. Let me do that right. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm doing the invoking one. Okay. So if we're starting in the bottom, we're going to start in the top right. This is so weird the way I'm drawing it, I know. But it goes like that. And I'll tell you what, underneath this video, I'm going to put a little diagram of how you draw it. And so it looks like this. And then I will do it in front of me and then turn around behind me and do it. So I'll say, protection in front of me, protection behind me, protection to the left of me, protection to the right of me, protection above me, protection below me. And then I close my eyes and then just imagine like light circling around you in a clockwise fashion. And then I do this 2 more times: protection in front of me, protection behind me, protection to the left of me, protection to the right of me, protection above me, protection below me, protection within me, and then I'll do it a 3rd time. You can even do it on your property, protect your house that way, protect your car if you have to leave it in a place where it's a little sketchy or something and you're worried about there's been break-ins in the area, things like that. So that is a nice little way. And because we're on the camera and everything's reversed, I'm going to put the picture right below this video for anyone who's interested in seeing a diagram of how you draw that. And then there is also a chant that you can do. I'll put the words below it, but the chant is Ekonkar, Satkar Tar Grul Balakal. And I have a video of me singing it, and if I can find it, I'll put this below as well. And this little chant is the chant of supernatural protection. And so there's even stories of warriors before they would go into battle, they would chant this chant in order to protect them from like certain death against their enemies or something. So it's Ekonkar, Satkar Tar, Grubal Akal. So I'll put that below as well. But these are just different ways that I might use to protect myself, especially if I feel like there's a lot of negative energy coming around me, or I'm going to go into a space where there's going to be maybe some highly negative people. And Jen said she's going to try the big egg this weekend. Yes, try it. Yeah, it can be very helpful. So Nicole had asked a kind of a similar question about signs that other people are doing work on you, and then she says, do you try to protect yourself, or you just ignore it? So if you feel that if a person feels like someone is actually done something to them, like put energy on, like negative energy on them, whether it was intentional or unconscious, you can try any of the things that I just mentioned. So drawing the pentagram, the protective pentagram, pushing that energy out around you, push that egg, make that big aura, make your aura really big. You can try the chant. You could try different crystals, put a ring of salt around your property or your space or something like that. The thing is that streaks of bad luck and unfortunate strings of accidents or just a gut feeling, it can feel like, yeah, maybe there is somebody who put something on you, right? So put some negative energy on you. In my experience, many of the curses that we think have been placed on us can often be traced back to shifts in our own energy that drew in kind of some negative, more not so positive energy. But it is possible that someone with more nefarious intents can put something on us like a hex. So I will say that there was a time that when, not in this house, but the house I lived in, the rental I lived in before now, someone threw a statue of Santa Muerte into our backyard. I found it one day when I was getting ready. I was cleaning up the backyard for a coven ritual, and I didn't know what the intention was. If it was just an accident. Someone thought it was funny. But we had, at that point, there had been a coven of witches who'd been practicing in that backyard for multiple years. So I didn't know if this was a neighbor who was doing something, sending some bad energy towards us. So the coven and I consulted about it. Our best thing that we could come up with is like, we felt that we were pretty protected with our own intentions. Like setting intentions of protection to encircle yourself that kind of protective magic is very strong. But at the same time, we didn't want this idol here with us, and so we took it and we put it in a baggie. We filled it with white salt, and then we actually took it and took it off the property and put it in a dumpster that we knew was going to a landfill. And then from there, we just kind of put protection around us. So, every once in a while, I get that feeling. Is there something somebody has done? In which case, then you step up the game. Then you do the pentagram, the banishing pentagram. Maybe you sing the chant, Ekonkar, and you try to do a little bit more protection. But if it's just kind of a general feeling that sometimes just kind of cleansing and clearing and pushing out your aura can be enough. All right, let me see here. I got one other question. Amanda said she'd love to see more on the Morrigan, and you really connect with her. Have some books, but generally she is not represented. Yeah, there isn't a lot. There are several books about her. I would go in and just research as much as you can about her, but she is a goddess that not as many people talk about. And of course, there are different forms of the Morrigan as well. Sometimes she will manifest into the triple goddess as well, the different forms. But she's a really good one to work with if you want to clear out negative energy, if you want to do any shadow work. She's a very, very good one for that. And then Amanda also said she loves a good scarf or even the large headbands with fabric to shield myself, and that brings a lot of comfort. Yeah, it's really interesting how, so covering the crown chakra, this is why there are certain religions and different cultures that cover the head, is to protect that crown chakra, or cultures and religions that cover the third eye as well. So kind of protecting those areas from energy. I find a lot of comfort by covering my solar plexus. So if I'm feeling a lot of anxiety, laying face down so that my solar plexus comes in contact with, it doesn't have to be the earth, it could just be the bed, but I find a lot of comfort in that as well. So everybody kind of has, so sometimes what I think it is if we have a chakra that's particularly open and we feel like there's too much energetic exchange going on, when we kind of cover that or we sort of dial it down a little bit, that can help us a lot. Okay, I have another question here from Lori. She was asking about cord cutting. She said, is cord cutting too advanced for a new broom, new witch? If so, can you recommend anything with a similar outcome? And then it is important, she's got a little bit of a backstory here. It's the cord cutting she's talking about is for her daughter who has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, who's been making some choices that Lori doesn't think are in her interest. She said she doesn't want to cut her out of her life physically, but just wants to do something symbolically and energetically, like cut the umbilical cord. Okay, so some people might disagree with me, and that's okay. We can all have different opinions. Some people say that cord cutting is too advanced for a newer witch. I personally don't think so. I think it's just your intentions have to be in the right place. Some people say that cord cuttings don't work. I know that they work, so if they don't work for some people, I know they've worked for me. So all I can do is give my own opinion and my own advice on this. So cord cutting is all about intention. There can be cords that are cut that are physical. There can be cords that are cut that are energetic, and it's possible to cut both. So what I will say, here's a couple of options for you. So the first thing is you do want to really set your intention. So my roommate and I have done cord cuttings. She had an abusive ex. We had a restraining order against this guy. We had no desire to ever, ever, ever see him ever again physically. And so we did a cord cutting that cut him from us both physically and energetically. And not only that, because my roommate was managing my band at the time, we had the cord cut between this person and our band as well. So she could feel that she could go to the shows and not worry about him showing up or something. So those kinds of cords, we were very clear we would never want to see him again physically, and you don't have to worry about quite as much. But if you have a physical connection with a person like your daughter, you don't want her out of your life, or a person who wants to do a cord cutting for perhaps like an ex-husband, but the husband still needs to see the kids. This becomes more like an energetic cord cutting that we want to do here, and it's all about our intention. So you first start by setting that intention. I'm cutting off myself energetically. I'm not cutting myself off physically, and just make sure that that's very clear, that intention. Now, one thing you can do, especially because you've mentioned the umbilical cord thing, is you can get a ribbon or a piece of yarn or something, and you can tie it around your waist, right at the solar plexus, and then leave a part of it kind of hanging out the front, right? And from there, you ceremoniously can cut that piece of yarn or ribbon and then send out that intention. And I'm like, I wish this other person well, but I am severing this particular energetic connection that we have created between us. So that's kind of a neat way that you can like symbolically do it. Now there are other ways where you can take a ribbon and same idea here, a piece of yarn, take 2 candles, and one is you and one is the other person. You wrap the ribbon or the string or the yarn around the two so that they are connected in the center. And then as the 2 candles begin to burn down, eventually that piece of string is going to catch on fire and it's going to sever. Now, if you're going to do this, just be highly careful about the fire nature of this spell, and make sure I would put it in my bathtub or a shower stall just to make sure that, usually when the string severs, it just kind of severs in the middle, but it can light a little bit. Don't use a really long one, just use something very short that will just kind of burn out very quickly. But just make sure that it's in a protected place, just to make sure that everything is safe in your house. And what I would do again is put out that intention. This is not a physical severing, this is an energetic severing. And that would be another way to kind of symbolically do it. If you want to do it more energetically in your mind, you can always just close your eyes, just kind of visualize that cord, that energetic cord that connects you to the other person. And then I like to take a selenite knife in my mind and I just sever that. And again, wishing them well, sending back what energy belongs to you that isn't serving me, sending that back to you with harm to none. So it's always really just about your intention. As long as you say with harm to none, and then I don't want this to be physical, I want this to be energetic, I think that you will be okay. But I would also follow up with mundane work. So make sure that you are setting clear boundaries and that you're sticking to them. So what we do in the magical world on that etheric plane, we want to make sure we're backing that up in the mundane and the physical world as well. Okay, and Lori said, I just don't want her to be tethered to me. I want her to be free to be herself. This is her path to walk. I just need to envision our separate paths. Yeah, so put all that intention into it, and your intention is the most important thing. And you said you have selenite sticks and tons of yarn, so you are all set with all that. All right, so if anybody has any more questions, drop them in the chat. Coming up next week, I don't know what it's going to be. I have TBD on my list on 6/14, so I will have a new episode next week of some subject of interest to us witches. On 6/21, I am going to do my Litha episode, my summer solstice episode, and our Coven of Midnight's Flame will be hosting a Litha ritual on 6/23 that Friday. So I hope that you can join us for that. There will be more information coming soon. Beth and I have not sat down to plan this out, but the last we talked, we're going to do some kind of work with the fairy realm just in time for midsummer. And then I also will mention that my course, Deepening and Demystifying Witchcraft, will be starting shortly after summer solstice. So you'll also hear some information about that coming soon. Those in the Shadow Seekers membership are offered the first spots, but we anticipate there will be some extra spots left over, and then anybody who's in Body Mind Witchcraft will be offering those as well. It's going to be at a deeply discounted price for everybody. All right, so if there are no more questions, I'm going to sign off today. I had oral surgery. I said this in the very beginning, and it hurts a lot to talk, and I've just talked for an hour, and now it's time to go take my pain meds. So until next time, blessed be.